There is a kind of pain that does not scream. There is a kind of heartbreak that does not argue, does not chase, does not beg to be understood. It simply becomes silent. And the people who understand this silence better than anyone are empaths. See, most people misunderstand the quietness of an empath. They think silence means weakness. They think withdrawal means surrender. They think because the empath stopped talking, they stopped feeling. But the truth is the exact opposite. The empath goes quiet because they feel too much. They are the ones who walk into a room and sense tension before a word is spoken. They are the ones who notice the pain hidden behind fake smiles. They are the ones who carry the emotional weight of everyone around them while pretending they are fine. And because they love deeply, betrayal cuts deeply. An empath does not break after one disappointment. They keep giving chances. They keep understanding. They keep forgiving. They keep hoping that the people they love will eventually love them with the same sincerity. But something dangerous happens when a kind heart is wounded too many times. It becomes tired, and tired souls stop explaining themselves. That is the psychology of the quiet empath. Their silence is not revenge. It is exhaustion. Because there comes a moment when the empath realizes they have been pouring oceans into people who only offered drops in return. They realize they have been fighting for relationships that others treated casually. They realize their compassion became a place where others rested while never asking if the empath was okay. And one day, something changes. The empath who once over-explained suddenly says nothing. The empath who once chased closure suddenly disappears emotionally. The empath who once tried to fix everything finally understands a painful truth. Not everyone deserves access to their heart. You see, empaths do not fear being alone. What destroys them is feeling alone around people who claim to love them. That pain changes a person. Because the deepest wounds are not always caused by enemies. Sometimes they are caused by people the empath trusted with their softness. And when trust is broken repeatedly, the empath begins to retreat inward. Not because they hate people, but because they must protect what is left of themselves. Their silence becomes survival. While others react with anger, empaths often react with distance. They disappear emotionally before they disappear physically. They stop sharing their inner world. They stop revealing their struggles. They stop asking for understanding. Why? Because wounded empaths learn that vulnerability in the wrong hands becomes self-destruction. So they become observers, quiet observers. They watch energy. They study behavior. They listen to what people do more than what they say. And here is what most people never realize. When an empath goes quiet, they are usually making one of the biggest decisions of their life. They are deciding whether your presence still feels safe, because empaths crave emotional safety more than attention, more than popularity, more than validation. They want honesty, peace, depth, loyalty, connection that feels spiritually genuine. And when those things disappear, the empath slowly disconnects. Not loudly, silently. That silence confuses people. Because many only valued the empath when they were giving, when they were comforting, when they were available, when they were sacrificing themselves. But once the empath stops pouring energy into everyone else, people suddenly notice the emptiness they took for granted. And by then, it is often too late. Because one thing about empaths is this: they forgive many times. But once they emotionally detach, returning is difficult. Not because they stopped caring, but because they finally started caring about themselves too. And that is where transformation begins. Pain becomes wisdom. The quiet empath NS rebuilding themselves in silence. They spend time alone. They reconnect with their spirit. They learn boundaries. They learn that protecting their peace is not selfish. It is necessary. For years they thought love meant self-sacrifice. Now they understand real love should not require self-destruction. And the beautiful thing is this: the empath who heals becomes incredibly powerful, because they still have kindness, but now it has boundaries. They still have love, but now it has discernment. They still have compassion, but now they know not everyone deserves unlimited access to it. The healed empath no longer begs to be chosen, no longer drains themselves trying to save people who refuse to heal, no longer abandons themselves just to keep others comfortable. Instead, they walk with quiet strength, and that kind of strength is rare, because the loudest people are not always the strongest. Sometimes the strongest soul in the room is the one who survived heartbreak without being broken. Oming cruel, that is the empath. They know pain, they know disappointment, they know betrayal. But even after everything, they still choose growth over bitterness. So if you are an empath who has gone quiet lately, understand this: your silence does not make you broken. Maybe your soul is simply asking for rest. Maybe your spirit is tired of carrying what was never yours to carry. Maybe life is teaching you that your energy is sacred. Stop apologizing for protecting your peace. Not everyone will understand your silence. Not everyone deserves an explanation. Sometimes silence is the soul rebuilding itself. Sometimes silence is wisdom speaking. And sometimes the quietest version of you is actually the strongest you have ever been. Empaths do not become silent because they are weak. They become silent because their emotional world becomes too heavy to explain. Most people think pain always looks loud. They expect anger, arguments, emotional outbursts, or dramatic reactions. But empaths are different. When they are deeply hurt, they often retreat inward instead of outward. Their silence is not emptiness. It is protection. It is the mind and soul trying to survive emotional overload. An empath absorbs energy naturally. They feel the emotions in a room before anyone even speaks. They carry tension, disappointment, sadness, and emotional conflict inside themselves without realizing how deeply it affects them. So when betrayal or rejection enters their life, it does not touch only the surface. It reaches places inside them that most people never see. The hurt becomes layered. It mixes with every sacrifice they made, every time they stayed quiet to keep peace, every moment they ignored their own needs for others. That is why silence becomes their shield. Instead of reacting impulsively, the empath withdraws because they are trying to process emotions they cannot immediately understand. Their nervous system becomes exhausted. Their heart becomes overwhelmed. You know that if they continue exposing themselves to the same pain, they may completely lose their emotional balance. So they pull away to breathe emotionally. They disconnect to regain clarity. This is not manipulation. This is survival. The dangerous thing is that many people misunderstand this silence. They assume the empath no longer cares. They think the empath is cold, distant, or dramatic. But the truth is the empath often becomes silent because they care too much. They are trying to stop themselves from saying words they do not truly mean. They are trying to protect the small piece of peace they still have left inside. An empath also understands that not every battle deserves energy. After repeated hurt, they begin to realize that constantly explaining themselves to people who refuse to understand only drains them further. Silence becomes a boundary, a way of saying, I will no longer destroy myself trying to make others see my pain. And while the world sees silence as weak, the empath quietly learns one of life's deepest lessons. Protecting your peace is not selfish. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is step back from chaos instead of fighting inside it. Their quietness is not surrender. It is wisdom formed through emotional pain. Empaths experience emotional pain differently from most people because they do not simply observe emotions around them, they absorb them. What feels minor to someone else can feel emotionally consuming to an empath. They carry the moods, stress, and energy of the people around them as if those emotions belong to them personally. This is why hurt affects them on such a deep psychological level. Their emotional system is constantly open, constantly receiving, constantly processing the emotional atmosphere around them. When someone speaks harshly to an empath, it is not just the words that affect them. They feel the intention behind the words. They notice the emotional energy beneath the conversation. They can see dishonesty, resentment, emotional distance, or hidden anger long before it becomes obvious. Because of this heightened awareness, emotional wounds tend to stay with them longer. They replay situations repeatedly in their minds, trying to understand what changed, what went wrong, and why someone they cared about caused pain. Many empaths spend years becoming emotional caretakers without even realizing it. They comfort others, listen without judgment, and become the safe place everyone runs to during difficult times. But while they are carrying everyone else emotionally, they often neglect their own emotional needs. They become so focused on healing others that they forget to protect themselves. Over time, this creates emotional exhaustion. The problem is that most people do not recognize how deeply empaths internalize emotional energy. An empath may smile on the outside while carrying emotional storms inside. They may seem calm while mentally drained from absorbing negativity all day. Crowded environments, conflict, toxic relationships, or emotionally unavailable people can completely overwhelm them without anyone noticing. And when hurt enters their life through betrayal, rejection, criticism, or emotional neglect, the impact becomes even stronger because empaths rarely love halfway. They invest emotionally with sincerity. They trust deeply. They give their full presence to people they care about. So when that love is mishandled, it does not feel like a simple disappointment. It feels like emotional shock. This is why empaths often become quiet after pain. Their mind and spirit need space to recover from the emotional weight they have absorbed. Silence becomes a place where they can separate their own feelings from the emotions of everyone around them. It becomes a form of healing. Over time, emotionally mature empaths begin learning that they cannot continue absorbing negativity without boundaries. They realize that sensitivity is a gift, but without self-protection, that gift can slowly turn into emotional suffering. The more they understand this, the more careful they become about who they allow close to their heart and energy. When empaths are hurt, they rarely react immediately. Instead of exploding emotionally or seeking instant revenge, they tend to withdraw into themselves. This withdrawal is not avoidance in the selfish sense. It is emotional processing. Their mind becomes filled with questions, emotions, memories, and inner conflict all at once, and silence becomes the only place where they can sort through what they are feeling. Empaths process pain deeply because they do not experience relationships casually. Every connection carries emotional meaning for them. When someone disappoints them, they do not just focus on the event itself. They think about the trust they gave, the energy they invested, the sacrifices they made, and the emotional bond they believed existed. A single painful moment can trigger layers of reflection inside them. That is why an empath may suddenly become distant after being hurt. While other people may quickly react outwardly, the empath turns inward. They replay conversations in their mind. They analyze behavior patterns. They try to understand whether the hurt was intentional, whether they ignored warning signs, or whether they expected too much from the wrong person. Their silence becomes a private emotional investigation. Many empaths also avoid reacting impulsively because they fear causing pain to others. Even when they are wounded, they still think carefully about the emotions of the people around them. They know words spoken in anger can leave permanent damage. So instead of speaking from emotional chaos, they choose temporary silence until they understand their feelings clearly. The problem is that people often misunderstand this behavior. They assume the empath is overthinking or being dramatic, but for the empath, emotional processing is necessary because they feel ions with great intensity. Their nervous system does not easily move on from emotional tension. Hurt lingers inside them longer because they genuinely cared. During this quiet period, the empath is often fighting battles no one sees. One part of them wants to forgive and reconnect. Another part wants to protect itself from further pain. They struggle between their compassionate nature and their growing awareness that constant emotional suffering is unhealthy. This inner conflict can become emotionally exhausting. Withdrawal also gives the empath space to reconnect with themselves. When they are constantly surrounded by other people's emotions, they can lose touch with their own needs and feelings. Solitude helps them separate what belongs to them emotionally from what they absorbed from others. In silence, clarity slowly returns. Over time, empaths begin to realize that not every relationship deserves unlimited emotional access to them. Their withdrawal teaches them discernment. It teaches them that healing sometimes requires distance, reflection, and emotional stillness. Their silence is not weakness or punishment. It is the process of rebuilding emotional balance after being emotionally overwhelmed. Empaths are often known for their patience, understanding, and willingness to forgive. They give people more chances than most would. Even after being disappointed, they try to see the good in others. They make excuses for harmful behavior, hoping people will eventually change. Because they value emotional connection deeply, they hold on to relationships long after others would have walked away. But there is a limit to how much emotional pain even the kindest heart can carry. At first, the empath stays quiet about the disrespect. They convince themselves they are being too sensitive. They try to avoid conflict. They continue giving love, support, and emotional energy even when they receive little in return. They keep hoping their loyalty will be appreciated one day. But repeated disrespect slowly changes something inside them. Every broken promise, every moment of emotional neglect, every act of dishonesty begins to accumulate emotionally. The empath may not react loudly, but internally they are keeping track of how often their kindness is being taken for granted. They notice when their efforts are ignored. They notice when they are only valued for what they provide emotionally. And although they continue trying to keep peace, the emotional weight becomes heavier each time they are hurt. One of the deepest psychological struggles for empaths is that they naturally try to understand everyone's behavior. Even when someone treats them poorly, they search for reasons behind it. They think about the other person's pain, trauma, stress, or emotional wounds. This compassion is beautiful, but it can also trap them in unhealthy situations for too long. They tolerate behavior that slowly destroys their emotional well-being because they keep believing understanding will fix the relationship. But eventually, a painful realization begins to form. The empath understands that empathy without boundaries becomes self-destruction. That realization changes everything. When an empath reaches emotional exhaustion, they stop fighting for the relationship the way they once did. The long explanations disappear. The emotional chasing ends. They stop trying to convince people to value them correctly. Instead, they become quiet. Not because they stopped caring, but because they finally understand that some people will continue disrespecting what they never truly appreciated. This emotional detachment often surprises others because the empath tolerated so much for such a long time. People become comfortable with the empath always forgiving, always understanding, always staying. They mistake patience for weakness. But what they fail to realize is that the empath was observing everything silently, and once an empath emotionally disconnects after repeated disrespect, it becomes difficult to rebuild the same level of trust again. Their silence is no longer temporary sadness. It is the result of realizing they can no longer sacrifice their peace just to keep others comfortable. One of the most misunderstood things about empaths is that they often make their biggest decisions in complete silence. They do not always announce when they are reaching their emotional limit. They do not always threaten to leave, demand attention, or create dramatic scenes. Instead, they quietly observe, reflect, and slowly detach internally long before anyone notices a change on the outside. An empath usually tries everything before reaching this point. They communicate gently. They forgive repeatedly. They give emotional support even when they are hurting themselves. They hold on to hope because they genuinely want peace and connection. But while they are giving chance after chance, they are also paying attention. They notice patterns. They notice inconsistency. They notice who truly values them and who only values their emotional availability. The important thing is this: when an empath stops explaining themselves, something significant has already changed inside them. Silence becomes a sign that they are no longer trying to force understanding from people who refuse to listen. They begin conserving emotional energy instead of constantly pouring it into conversations that lead nowhere. What looks like emotional distance on the surface is often the result of months or even years of emotional exhaustion underneath. During this quiet phase, the empath is thinking deeply. They are asking themselves difficult questions. Why do I keep tolerating behavior that hurts me? Why am I always the one fighting to save the relationship? Why do I feel emotionally drained instead of emotionally safe? These questions slowly awaken self-awareness inside them, and once that awareness grows, the empath begins making decisions privately. They may still smile. They may still speak politely. They may still appear emotionally present. But internally, they are preparing themselves to let go. This is why people are often shocked when an empath finally walks away. To others, it looks sudden. But for the empath, the decision was built slowly through countless moments of disappointment, silence, and emotional pain that nobody noticed. Empaths dislike hurting people, so they rarely leave impulsively. They think carefully before emotionally disconnecting from someone they love. But once they realize their peace is constantly being damaged, their silence becomes clarity. They stop begging for effort. They stop trying to rescue broken connections alone. They stop abandoning themselves to maintain relationships that only survive through their sacrifice. There is also a deep spiritual side to this silence. Empaths often trust their intuition strongly. When something no longer feels emotionally safe, their inner world begins warning them, quietly. Even if they cannot explain it logically, they feel the emotional imbalance deeply. Their silence becomes a space where intuition speaks louder than words. And when an empath finally chooses peace over attachment, they often do it without anger. Quietly, calmly, permanently. Pain changes empaths in ways most people never fully understand. Because they feel emotions so deeply, heartbreak, betrayal, and disappointment do not simply pass through them quickly. These experiences reshape their inner world. But what makes empaths powerful is that, despite how deeply they suffer, they often use pain as a path toward growth instead of becoming bitter. Their healing process transforms them. In the beginning, hurt usually leaves the empath emotionally exhausted. They question themselves constantly. They wonder whether they gave too much, trusted too deeply, or ignored signs they should have noticed earlier. Since empaths naturally blame themselves before blaming others, emotional pain comes before, and temporarily weaken their confidence. They replay situations in their mind, searching for meaning in everything that happened. But over time, silence and reflection begin teaching them important lessons. They realize that kindness without boundaries invites emotional exhaustion. They realize that constantly saving others can slowly destroy their own peace. And most importantly, they realize that loving people should never require abandoning themselves. This awareness becomes the beginning of emotional strength. A healed empath does not stop being compassionate. They simply become wiser about where their energy goes. They stop trying to earn love through sacrifice. They stop chasing people who only appreciate them when they are useful emotionally. Instead, they begin protecting their peace with intention. This transformation often surprises people. The empath who once tolerated disrespect becomes more selective about relationships. The empath who once over-explained now chooses silence over unnecessary conflict. The empath who once carried everyone's burdens begins asking, "Who is carrying mine?" Their boundaries become stronger because pain taught them what happens when boundaries do not exist. Healing also changes the way empaths view themselves. Instead of seeing sensitivity as weakness, they begin recognizing it as emotional intelligence. They understand that their ability to feel deeply is actually rare in a world where many people hide behind emotional walls. They stop apologizing for caring deeply and start learning how to care for themselves with the same compassion they once gave only to others. One of the most beautiful parts of an empath's healing journey is that they often become calmer, wiser, and spiritually stronger after pain. Suffering forces them inward. It pushes them to reconnect with their intuition, values, and sense of purpose. They begin choosing environments, friendships, and relationships that feel emotionally safe rather than emotionally draining. And although the healed empath may appear quieter than before, there is incredible strength in that quietness. It is no longer the silence of confusion or emotional pain. It is the silence of someone who has survived heartbreak, learned difficult lessons, and finally understands their own worth. In the end, the quietness of an empath is never something to underestimate. Behind that silence is a soul that has felt deeply, loved sincerely, suffered quietly, and still chosen growth over bitterness. Empaths do not go silent because they have nothing to say. They go silent because life has taught them the value of protecting their peace, guarding their energy, and choosing themselves after years of emotional sacrifice. And sometimes, the strongest transformation happens not in the noise of the world, but in the silence where healing begins. If you are an empath, never be ashamed of your sensitivity. Your heart is not your weakness, it is your gift. Thank you all for listening. And may you continue to walk in wisdom, peace, strength, and self-respect.